Welcome to Voices of the Surplus Army, a side project of the Autonomia podcast. In this project, I hope to bring voices from the houseless community to you in hopes of breaking the artificial barrier between the housed and the unhoused. For most of us, if just a few things went wrong, we too could end up in the streets. Our only way forward is solidarity across the entirety of the working class, regardless of whether we have a roof over our heads or not. The intro and outro music comes to us from Pat the Bunny, and the song is called "The Hand You Reach Out Is Empty, As Is Mine." Thank you for listening. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of Voices from the Surplus Army. I have our friend Doc here to bring us in to the situation he's been dealing with for probably close to 5 years now. As I seem to recall, maybe 2019 or 18, you were forced out of your home and began your journey of houselessness, and been getting knocked around by the system ever since. You listeners may recall the Tent City fight, and then the Tent City 2 fight, where the local government destroyed the houses we made as a harm reduction maneuver in order to keep people safe during a respiratory pandemic. Then, of course, we had a little structure for you at our Fort Trumbull Memorial Orchard, which was eventually, again, demolished by local government, making you homeless yet again.
Yep.
And now we're in a situation where you've been trying to get something of a life for yourself for quite some time. Interestingly enough, you had told me once you were, quote, too poor for financial aid for school? Something along those lines?
I had applied to go back to finish my bachelor's in public health, having done like 3 years of public health during the pandemic. And the college I applied to here in New London took one look at my transcript and basically told me, yeah, your academics are all good and you look like you'd be a fine fit for the school. You're simply too poor. Those were their words, too poor.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that I've encountered a little bit as well with some people in my family where they were going to school, again, in the medical industry, and they simply didn't have the money, in her case, to get a laptop to make going to medical school practical, and there just wasn't a mechanism for helping her afford that. So in so many ways, you can just be disqualified even if you have the qualifications. And again, going back a couple of years, I mean, you had a career path for public health, and you know, when you get your house yanked out from underneath you, these things can change.
Sure can.
And of course, in the process of spending all of this time sort of outside of the officially sanctioned social channels, it's kind of hard to keep track of all the documents, or maybe you don't have an address, you know.
Well, it's not even so much that I didn't have an address. The reason I don't have my birth certificate and my state ID and my social security card was because as a result of the Tent City 2 eviction, a lot of my personal possessions, along with possessions of other folks at Tent City 2 at the time, were trashed, just completely out of the blue and with no accountability whatsoever. And among my segment of the trash that was stolen by the police department was all of my government documents.
Right, so you have a situation now where a lot of folks across the country are wanting these cities to get cleaned up, which in real terms means these encampments where people might have the few remaining documents they have get taken and in many cases put straight into a dumpster. You then have a situation where an American citizen is essentially an undocumented person.
Yeah.
And if you've ever had to try to replace your social security card, you need a lot of other supplemental documents to cross-verify who you are.
Everything that I had that was stolen from me by the government also tells me I need other pieces of documentation, which they stole from me, in order for me to replace the documents, which, in case I haven't stressed this enough, they stole from me in the first place.
And so how does this work out when trying to get official employment?
You cannot without your official documents. You can't even, even in my kitchen days, like at my sketchiest diner job 7-8 years ago, I still had to have like my state ID and so on. At least my photo ID, which I simply do not have. And I don't have the money to replace these documents because I need work to have money, and I can't get work because I don't have the documents, which means I don't have the money to replace the documents. So you see how these are all connected here.
Absolutely. And so within my industry, construction, for example, we have tons of folks that want to work for us, but might not have the infrastructure to actually have that job. So maybe it be it tools or transport or anything. But at the end of the day, even if you had all of that but didn't have documentation, I am then hiring you illegally and put myself at risk for close to $10,000 in fines. A small business in this economy, I can't even take that risk if I wanted to. And so obviously, to some degree, it's important to make sure that, people that are working are working in a dignified manner, and under the table folks are often exploited. So there is that kind of other side to it.
Yeah.
But a person in your situation, which is probably far more common than most people realize, how do you get out of that? And the answer is what? Just starve?
Pretty much. Like, it's harder because the people who mean well but who don't know enough about my situation or know me personally would simply tell me, oh, you have to go to the city's shelter and go through the shelter system in order to get all of these things done. And the problem with that is my history of the past 5 years with the city shelter system is fighting them to try to stop them from collaborating with the city government to make my homeless neighbors even more at harm's way than they had already been.
Yeah, so a big part of our fight with a lot of the official channels over the years wasn't necessarily a fight we wanted. We were just saying, we're trying to fill this gap in what you're failing to address. And their response was chainsaws and police escorts. So this is very difficult. You're going into a place where these folks probably might not even like you, but even if they do, we're in a situation where this county has a tremendous burden of people that are really struggling with housing. How does that infrastructure deal with it? And the answer is usually it doesn't. You end up a number and a line, during which time you still need to eat food. You still need to try to figure out how to build your life. And a lot of folks that are stuck in this situation often get, sicker, develop chronic health problems that you see as a street medic all the time.
All the time.
There are so many dimensions to this that just make it worse and worse. But the system is often in its own way. And it's hard not to imagine that some of that is malicious. But I'm getting into speculation here. But it sure feels malicious.
I'd almost rather it was malicious, because the idea that this is all happening through inertia and indifference is almost more horrifying.
Just the grinding bureaucracy, just doing everything through the exactly official ways. How many people out there in this country right now are in a similar situation to you? And perhaps even more critically for the folks listening, how many of you could be in that cascading situation within a month if a couple things went wrong? You fall and break your leg.
Yeah, most Americans at this point, there have been studies and stuff. I mean, I can't cite them chapter and verse, but short version is most Americans at this point can't afford a $400 emergency.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, I know I can.
I've been in a lot of situations where I am skipping meals, dumpster diving to make ends meet. I am profoundly fortunate that I have a sort of a family compound situation where a bunch of my family members pooled resources and we were able to secure this little slice of what remains of the American dream. But that's not accessible to the overwhelming majority of people. And now we have the situation where a lot of these massive corporations are buying up all the land, basically making ownership, insofar as it's even possible in this country, less accessible to even more people. Right. So, now you're always being forced into these rental arrangements, and most of them use their position in a very exploitative way. And by the way, when you're applying to live in a place and you don't have any documentation, how's that work?
It just doesn't.
It doesn't?
You simply don't have a place to live.
Right, because if you can't, maybe a lot of these places now will want a credit check, because in their own personal best interest, they want to make sure that you're able to pay. But if you don't have that,
I'm not even sure if I have a credit history. I mean, I probably do somewhere.
Yeah, but they're probably not even going to take that risk. And until humanity at large tries to understand the fact that housing is probably a reasonable human fundamental right, in my opinion, we're going to have these people that are existing outside of the system because they fall through the cracks or things don't work in some manner. But then the name of the show comes to mind, the voices of the army of surplus labor. I often wonder if folks in your position aren't acting as a threat to anyone who might stop being in line. You don't want to end up like those people.
Yeah,
and
I could see someone very, very explicitly pointing to me and saying, you better, dot your I's and cross your T's and pay your rent and pay your taxes and so on. Otherwise, you'll end up like Doc over here.
And it also can serve to help keep wages down as well. You have this group of people that are always more desperate. And to play members of the working class against each other is really insidious. Yeah, but we see it all throughout history.
Which is hilarious because, if anyone knows me, they know that, if someone came to me and, took me aside and was like, hey, I'm willing to hire you. I will replace all of your documents and everything, but you have to fuck over, this whole handful of your neighbors over here. I wouldn't do it. I've given up enough sufficiently to where I go back and forth and I try sometimes to get my documents and things. And I keep getting beaten back into the crack that I'm in. But I'm at the point where I've given up enough that I'm just off in my own space, tending my crops and getting by.
Yeah, I mean, you're a couple steps away from Bigfoot at this point.
Pretty much.
It's so frustrating to imagine a situation where there, in so many ways, truly isn't a way out. Your best thing you can do is just stand in this line and hope that the system has mercy upon you, right, when it's shown you everything but. You know?
No, mercy is not a thing that I expect at this point. Maybe I would have 2 years ago, 3 years ago, but I'm on year 4, almost year 5, and I'm.
Yeah, we've tried reasoning with the local people about this. Folks, average everyday people understand the utility of harm reduction and trying to find a place for people, but it's not in the best interest of the system to provide for folks at the bottom. It needs those people to point to and say, look, need to be like...
Not to mention the relationship between the nonprofits and the charities and such and the local city government. There's a quote from Upton Sinclair, great American, who once said, "It's hard to get a man to understand something if his salary depends on him not understanding it."
Right, and so if you are perhaps making money off of addressing homelessness, but not necessarily solving it, and I don't think the system wants to solve it, and that's kind of what I'm pointing at here. It's as if I'm looking at, let's see, maybe 4 to 6 vacant buildings, completely vacant, some vacant on several floors. There's a lot of people in this city that don't have places to live, and they're walking past buildings that have been vacant for pretty much the entirety of our aid organization's existence.
Yeah, which is year 7 now, so quite a while.
And you have, along with me and a few other people, we've walked into abandoned houses in this city, and within an hour, the police are showing up, locking up the place. So they don't really want to solve this problem, because solving this problem would kind of allow us to question what underpins our system. And it's all kicking the can down the road, because Tent City 2, behind the bank there, after it was evicted, guess what's there again? Doc can tell you.
Yeah, I ran into a guy from the shelter after I was helping a few friends of mine try to not... So, backing up a minute here, friends of mine were camping out on their own land in order to wait on paperwork to move into the house they'd bought so they could rehab it and make it habitable. The police came and swept their tent off of their own land. And so I was talking to one of the shelter guys who told me after the shelter participated years ago in the Tent City 2 defense and eviction and clear swept the area, that now the shelter has once again sanctioned an encampment back there.
Isn't that amazing? Because and this is going to keep happening, and this is what we tried to argue with the system about, is you're not going to stop homelessness by destroying homeless people's shelters. You're just going to make sure it happens again, but with less stuff. And Doc is a fantastic example of this. So Doc's more or less back where he started. He could, in theory, pop a tent right over there, but he would be in the same place he was several years ago, but without his documents, thanks to the taxpayer-funded efforts of making you homeless again.
Yay!
It's just...
I would have appreciated... I don't have much regard for the taxpayers, whatever that means, but I, for one, would have appreciated it if maybe the government hadn't wasted resources stealing government documents from me and then penalizing me for not having the government documents that the government stole from me. When the government steals from me, who am I supposed to go to get that, redress? The government? No.
Well, you simply have to speak truth to power, and power always cares about truth,
I should wave a cardboard sign that's please give me back my cards.
Well, see, waving a cardboard sign, you need a permit for that.
Yeah,
and you have to
yeah.
move along.
Mm-hmm.
You could get arrested. That could always. I'm sure that would help with your employment
Oh, there'd be
prospects,
so many documents after that.
Yeah,
There's certainly records and everything.
it's unbelievably frustrating, and I look around every time we do these monthly things, and we talk to people that have variations of the same story. The thing you just touched on with your friends buying a piece of land, getting the American dream, finally getting it, and then being escorted off of their own land by the government.
Yeah.
Hopefully these people will consent to an interview, because this story is like blood boiling to me. And even conservatives that listen to what I talk about should be able to see, like, even these property fetishists should be able to understand this is insane. Everyone knows at some level the government doesn't care about you, but not a lot of people experience it quite so directly as the people I'm trying to bring to you through this series.
Right. Like, yeah, I can't stress enough, my friends were camped out on their own land. This is not a Tent City 2 repeat. They were on a tent on their own 4 acres of land, waiting on the ability to move into their house so they could rehab it and make it habitable. The house was not habitable at the time, and it still isn't. But now, instead of being on their own land and being property owners and having the American dream, the police simply showed up and told them to get off of this land. They were legally considered trespassing on their own land.
Trespassing on their own land, and as I recall, encouraged to camp illegally, trespassing behind where Tent City 2 is.
Correct. That was the offered solution from the shelter.
And this shows you that they don't actually care about legality unless they can hurt you with it.
Right. There's no plan. No one has a plan. Like, the idea of this all being malicious implies that there's some super secret evil cabal that has a plan and is like actively trying to like harm me further. And like, speaking on behalf of like many homeless people, and this is what I tell people in my position all the time, there is no plan. There's no plan. Everyone is just trying to scrape by, trying to clear checks, trying to draw a salary, and just sort of keep the machine going as long as possible.
And it just keeps steamrolling people, because you see new folks pretty frequently
every
in
week,
your work. So,
every other day.
You know, and some people manage to bounce out of that, and all more power to them. But that is, once you start to hit that cascade, what can you do? And, you know, when homeless folks start to, you know, get together and build support infrastructure for themselves, it gets destroyed because it's illegal. But then that same system will tell you go camp after they've destroyed all your infrastructure.
Yep.
Because it's not about legality. You know, it's about, to me, again, I'm more cynical perhaps than you, but it seems like just staying in control and preventing folks from self-organizing. Because every time they try to self-organize in some way, there's a problem.
It
like,
just kicks crush flat. Yeah, no,
like,
absolutely.
We showed up with a 16-foot cargo trailer to Tent City 2 to start doing trash disposal infrastructure, because, you know, homeless folks are frequently insulted by saying, you know, like, hey, look at these dirty people. It's like, well, how would you do at your house if you didn't have access to the dump or to the, you know, trash disposal like most folks do?
Right.
What would you do with it? Like, this
Right.
stuff is heavy. So, like, how would you do without any support infrastructure?
Yeah,
Most folks don't do all that well.
Yeah, the person who, like, there was one specific neighbor of ours we had already known of and sort of, like, talked to internally and tried to help her figure out disposing her mountains of trash. And eventually she left and got housing. Good for her. I haven't seen her in a couple of years. But we were like, okay, we need to dispose of all of this woman's trash. So we figured out, you know, trash disposal infrastructure. And the shelter and the police and the business owners nearby all hated that. They despite all their complaining, they hated the idea of disposing of trash just as much as, if not more than, the idea of dirty, trashy, homeless people being there in the first place.
It's almost as if they don't want a solution, they just want to be mad about it.
Exactly.
And, you know, whenever we try to propose solutions, we get called, you know, silly or ridiculous or unrealistic. But if we're actually making a realistic solution to things, we're actually physically doing it, and then we get interrupted in the process of doing that, to me it's disgraceful, because
Right.
there's no viable alternative. And Tent City 2 was during the early days of COVID, when no one had any idea what was going on. It was like this mystery plague that we had no idea how it spread, how long it was.
Right.
And a lot of
I was actively trying to do what my local public health department could not apparently be bothered to do, which is to go out in the community and do as much health education and outreach and distribute masks and so on as possible. And I simply had to be diverted from that in order to fight for my life and the lives of my neighbors, because the politicians and the police responded to the pandemic by simply cracking down on the homeless encampment while they were at it.
A lot of people understood when we spoke to them, saying, hey, we have this mystery respiratory pandemic, and a lot of people don't feel like being crowded in a shelter in a time where folks were already suffering very badly economically. That seems fundamentally very reasonable, and it seems like a harm reduction method to spread people out a little bit, maybe social distancing.
Right.
But even outside those terms we came up with during COVID, folks lying on top of each other is a recipe for disease in good times.
Yeah. Every internment camp, every concentration camp, every prison, every form of congregate forced population you've ever seen in human history leads to typhus and typhoid and various other diseases.
And when we tried to say to them, what is your plan for dealing with this? Because surely you agree that this is also an issue. And that's when their allegiance to order more than justice, or their allegiance to order more than the public well-being, really came out. These are folks that just care about doing it the right way when it's convenient to them.
Right. And if they can't and they won't do it, they absolutely will not allow anyone else to solve their own problems either.
No, because I guess that might give people ideas.
Yeah. There was a story I saw a few weeks ago of a woman who was living in a supermarket sign for months. She had her bedding and she had electricity and so on, and she was caught. And I shared this with our group chat, and I said, listen, if the government catches you surviving, like what happened at Tent City 2, what that means is there's at least a chunk of the people who are showing up to catch you who want you dead. They just do.
Yeah.
They want you dead. And if they want you dead, if they declare that your survival is illegal and they want you dead, then you have the moral right to do whatever you have to do to survive, period.
I mean, it seems like a pretty simple principle, but when it comes to applying it, the folks defending what's left of their homes are suddenly the bad guy. Because
right.
I guess maybe it's only considered violence when it flows up the hierarchy, but when it flows down, it's just business as usual. But
yeah.
You're humans every bit as much as the people that are out there trying to destroy your home, and
right.
Whether or not they confront it, what you are doing when you're destroying someone's home or dragging them out of their home is understanding you are more loyal to the law that says they have to get out of their home than you care about them being alive, because fundamentally you are putting that person's life and safety at risk.
Absolutely.
Even if it's just you're no longer in a house and you might have people, maybe a former victim of intimate partner violence or something.
Very commonly, yeah.
Right, these things happen, and now you're just out on the street. You don't have a place away from people. Those people that go about this system and follow these orders, I'm just following orders, just going and doing that, are putting people at risk. And whether or not they actually are willing to confront that in themselves, they don't care.
No, they do not care.
Some of them probably do actually want you dead consciously.
Right.
But even if it's just indifference.
Which is, I'm going to be honest, as someone who's had my share of violence done to me and death threats and so on, I know how to emotionally handle that. I can deal with that more than I can deal with this blank wall of indifference that's well, I have this paper that says you have to go die now.
Yeah,
and I don't want you dead. I'm just an automaton following orders.
Maybe it's because we as humans, somewhere deep in our lizard brain, understand an adversary,
right.
Understand a threat.
Right.
But we don't really know how to deal with just a blank wall of
it's sort of an uncanny valley thing, really, too, where I don't. At that point, you're not acting even as a malicious human being. You're acting inhumanly, and it frightens me. I don't like it.
I had a very brief brush with this sort of thing. I was overseas in the mountains of Austria. Our train broke down, and they gave a couple of people vouchers for the local hotels. For whatever reason, they didn't have enough for all the hotels. I happened to get one, and I was sharing my car with this doctor that was performing surgery the next day. And I'm like, hey, we'll share a room, no big deal. And we go to the hotel, and this Austrian lady says, "Wer ist your other ticket?" Like, well, it's fine. I'll sleep on the floor. It's like, no, it is a one-person room. Like, what do you mean? There's snow on the ground outside. Like, it's February. What are you talking about? And she's like, well, you must have a ticket to get in. Like, I'll sleep on the floor. Mm-hmm. She's like, no, like, we're not lovers. Like, is this a homophobia thing? Like, what is this? And after about 10 minutes of talking to this, as you put it, uncanny valley stone wall, I was like, dude, I looked over to the doctor. I'm like, you got surgery tomorrow. Like, I have nothing going on tomorrow. So I was like, I'm going to go sleep under a bridge. And so I spent the night, in frozen Austria under a bridge. Because, like, what am I going to do? Like,
right. And she probably hated that, too. She's like, no, I don't want you to go sleep under a bridge because that's illegal.
I didn't tell her where I was sleeping. Imagine the Austrian police,
no.
With their very close to German uniforms, perhaps.
Oh, yeah, no.
But like this bureaucracy, this adherence to rules over humanity, I think you're really onto something there. It hits us in a weird way that is like they've dehumanized themselves, but you almost get dehumanized as well in the process. Like it makes you feel less human as a result of dealing with these.
Because you're acting inhumanly. You're not acting like in accordance with basic human instincts towards like helping each other out, and even human beings who hate each other act a certain way towards each other. But like chimpanzees will fight over territory or whatever, but you won't. Like, chimpanzees don't run death camps.
No, I suppose not. Not as far as we're aware of. The perhaps the insect world might, but
maybe,
they're a whole nother ball game. But the serious question here is like, what is your future outlook here? I mean, it just wait for something to happen and try to survive.
Just get by as best I'm able.
Wait to be killed by the state for sneezing the wrong way.
Pretty much. I mean, just my whole this COVID happened when I was like towards the end of my 20s, and now I'm in my 30s, and there's no hope, there's no future, there's no none of that.
And do you think there's any chance of making America great again?
I mean,
but what I'm getting at is regardless of who gets in, right? Right. We saw a tremendous amount of encampment sweeps under Trump during COVID. During the worst of the possible times, they're further depriving people more. Yeah. It's not like we haven't seen that stop under Biden. We had a tent city encampment cleared a couple months ago at this point.
At this point, yeah.
Right here locally. I mean, there's a certain character of this institution that exists regardless of who's in charge. And so when you talk about this no hope thing, I seem to recall a guy running on hope when we were kids, but right. I don't know how much hope there is. You just maybe get picked to have the housing voucher, and maybe when that expires, by then you've had something figured out. But how many people can get that?
I'd like to point out too, as an anecdote, at the end of the Tent City 2 eviction, the shelter went to all of the residents, and they basically said, look, if you're willing to publicly side against the rest of your neighbors in Tent City, and we'll give you a housing voucher and we'll get you out of there and you'll be all set. And there were a couple people that took that deal. The vouchers lasted 6 months, and every single person I know that took that deal is now just right back where they were. I did not do that, and I simply moved to another spot and then got caught and moved to another spot, but I'm otherwise no worse off than I was.
And that's the thing. People have this idea of oh, well, look at all the people we've gotten off the streets. Well, what have you actually done? It's usually just kicking the can down the road, because if you don't deal with the underlying problems there, which, maybe from my perspective are a little more deep-rooted in the system than other people's critiques, but if you don't deal with this underlying problem, you're not really doing anything. You're collecting your grants and shuffling people around.
Right.
And maybe the people change, but the problem certainly hasn't.
Yeah, the grants come in, they get translated into, operating budgets, and a good chunk of those operating budgets for the shelter and so on are just people's salaries. So they have no reason to fundamentally solve the issue. If we had our way, both of us here, we would put people in these buildings that are all around us right here. But if we ended homelessness tomorrow in New London, that'd be the worst thing in the world for the shelter. The shelter would hate that. They'd be among the first people, along with the landlords, to be like, no. But
there was the March to End Homelessness.
Oh, they do it every year.
Did they win?
No.
Oh.
No. I wasn't even aware there was a march to end homelessness until like a couple days later, and I was like, oh yeah, nope, still in my tent.
Yep.
So,
but like, just
and the best I can hope for is that the shelter doesn't perceive me, and I can continue to sort of, chill in my tent as best I'm able.
So before we started building the tiny homes for folks through the Autonomous Community Assistance Bureau, ACAB for short,
Hell yeah.
before we started doing that, we explored squatting because there's just tons of stuff everywhere. But the fundamental risk in that is, especially in my case, I'm not a member of the homeless community. Who am I to say, all right, person who's already struggling enough, go take this huge risk and probably get beaten up and deprived even more? Like, squatting is very high visibility, and if you have local people in government that don't respect squatters' rights,
right,
then you're just putting people at risk. And like, would I love to be able to just get these places and have my company fix them up and put people in them? Absolutely. I would probably lose my license. These people would get brutalized and have nothing to show for it. So tiny homes were the best we could do because that was the only way we could help people hide, because that's what you have. You hide.
Right, it's hiding. Right, so
and
people don't kill you.
And so it's hiding safely.
And I can respect, like, I sometimes I joke with friends of mine. I'm like, look, I know the rules of the game, and if the rules of the game turn into, if we catch you, we're gonna kill you. Like, that's straightforward. Morally, I can respect that. If you catch me, you're gonna try to kill me. Then the gloves come off for me too. They come off for every person in every tent, in every squat, in every abandoned building, underneath every bridge in the United States. And you don't want that. But there is no other plan other than keep brutalizing people until a spark goes off.
And in some places it has.
Mm-hmm.
And those people are often maligned in the media, saying, oh, well, these dangerous anti-fascists, these dangerous anarchists, they just want disorder. It's like, well, more often than not, we're fighting a system that is trying to hurt people.
Right, right.
And, sometimes challenging that system leads to conflict, because that system will not, power concedes nothing without a demand.
Right.
As we know.
Mm-hmm.
And so, again, with the folks that we're trying to help being the ones that are taking the brunt of this risk, the best we could do is just help them safely hide. And even that was too much.
It's too much.
like
nobody liked that.
Like, how many people do you see per year whose tent got ripped or flooded, or the zipper broke, or like a branch fell on it? Like,
just this past January, I got myself some new tent poles after my fiberglass poles cracked in the cold.
Right, that's another thing. The poles can crack.
Yeah, and then when your poles crack, your structure, like your actual physical structure, is just gone. It's just a pile of fabric. So I had these new poles that a friend of mine gave me that were too large. So I went back to my site, tried rigging up the new unbroken poles, which also immediately cracked because they were also fiberglass and too large. So I had to take them out, put in the old broken poles I had tied together with rope. And as I'm doing all that and redoing the tent cover, a storm is coming in and just power washed the inside of my tent.
And so the other thing that comes to mind is, well, the tents that most people have access to, probably going to be cheaper tents that are designed for like weekend campers.
Yeah.
So like,
yeah, it says on the label of the tent I live in, you're not supposed to live in this for more than a month. I've been in it for like a year.
Yeah, these are not long-term shelters. So
No.
Part of being outside is temperature extremes, UV exposure,
Mm-hmm.
wind, rain, rust, critically for a lot of those metal components in it.
Right.
But what if you save up after the money you somehow get from working under the table to buy a nice tent, and then the next day it gets cleared out by the cops? Like,
Right.
there's no way to win. And so our best way to deal with this was, again, I work in construction, so I have no shortage of surplus materials from like demolition jobs or whatever. Building these little houses for a grand total of around $300 or so. So around the cost of like an upper level tent. But we can hide them, they can take impact, I can jump on the roof. You can insulate them if you want a lot more easily.
The cabin that I lived in at the Orchard for just about 2 years, 3 years, nothing structurally was wrong with it right up until the government plowed the whole orchard under. Like, that was bad, and I had to leave, but there was no reflection on the structural safety of the cabin. The cabin was great. No complaints.
Yeah, absolutely. And
I had a house. It was great. It's the only time in my adult life I've had a place to myself that was mine.
Yeah, and after you were fenced off, you had sort of a caged animal experience.
Sure did.
And so your house and all of your stuff was then fenced off and, in a brightly lit area where no one can get in very easily. And so you, for your safety, left the community, and I went in there to hop over the fence, emptied your entire house out as best as I could, and carried all the materials on my back out of there. But how many people have that?
Right.
How many people have the opportunity to have that window for getting in there anyways? Like, how many homeless people have a friend with a pickup truck? Like,
right, exactly. Like, I was very lucky in that regard.
This is not most people's experience.
No, it's
and
not.
So there's a fundamental brain break that people have to assume that one person's experience is mappable to everyone else's. It's not. And you understood that with the whole tent city thing, when they're trying to basically bribe you for your obedience,
right,
with a lot of strings attached, mind you. But what, are you gonna just sell out all of your neighbors for what, 6 months of having a roof over your head?
Right.
You're not going to solve the problem. And so to have refused that so publicly, a lot of people
were angry at me.
Absolutely.
I met even a few homeless folks who were like, I would have taken that deal. I'm like, I know you would have.
Yeah.
But I had to show a different example. I'm like, no, this is not how people get out of this situation, by looking out for number one.
And that solidarity with your fellow unhoused people, past, present, and most critically, future.
There's such a backlog. There's an eviction tracking website that I use that their data is woefully out of date by 2 years, but roughly at this point there's about more than 2,000 evictions filed in New London County alone.
That seems like a lot.
Yeah, and that's for households. That's not for individuals. So every case could be anything from one person to a family of 4 or 5 more.
Yeah, who knows?
So there's thousands of people who are going to be on the streets in the coming months.
And then, there's such a hidden homeless population as well. Like, how many people are crashing on their friends' couches?
Exactly. Yeah.
And
sleeping in cars.
How many of those eviction situations probably have multiple families just trying to shack up?
And how many evictions happen that never go through court, where the landlord just shows up with his brother-in-law or whatever and says, get out of here or I'll hurt you.
I'm sure it happens, and when that occurs, how many people know their rights, and even if you do know your rights, what are the chances that it's actually going to get enforced?
Right.
Who knows?
If I've done some work sharing information from the Connecticut Tenants Union. If you're a tenant, you need to join the tenants union. You need to know what your rights are, because your landlord is going to try to evict you. It's just a question of when.
Yeah,
I don't care if your landlord is some nice little old lady or whatever, or a mom and pop arrangement or something. If you have a landlord and you're a tenant, your landlord will try to evict you and upsell whatever unit it is that you're living in.
Absolutely. And this is where we get toward that whole systemic critique of that dynamic, the landlord dynamic. I mean, we're so used to it because we've lived in a world of landlordism for centuries now. In some cases, probably longer, depending on how you define it.
Right.
But what is fundamentally happening there, I once heard the description, a landlord provides housing like a scalper provides concert tickets. It's
yes, exactly.
you're buying up all of this. And, maybe a lot of people think of landlords as the little old lady you're talking about. And
right.
I don't know. I feel a little more muddy about that, because I think in an ideal situation, there might be a world in which people that don't feel like doing the maintenance on their house might provide a specialist who maintains and works. There's probably something there.
Right.
But that's not most people at this
No.
point. It's these corporate landlords that are have properties all over the country that will just evict you in a heartbeat.
Easily.
This is not a person you can reason with.
No.
And that's becoming more and more the norm. I don't remember the number. It was something like 90-something% of all private home acquisitions in the past couple of years during COVID were by private equity firms.
Oh, yeah. BlackRock alone, has bought up the equivalent of entire counties worth of housing stock.
And this is the kind of thing where capitalism is getting so insane that even right-wingers are like, well, this is bad. It's we've been warning about this the whole time.
Right.
Fundamentally, this is how the free market works if you give it enough time. It starts to form. It's a system for building private empires.
Well, this is why, you see, on, libertarian Reddit and such, you see, oh no, this isn't real capitalism. This is like, a corporate capitalism or what's the phrase that they use? It's
Crony
like,
capital.
Crony. Yeah, crony capitalism or whatever the phrase is. Like a denial of reality in favor of whatever exists in their head, whatever ideological construct they're working with.
And it's amazing because a lot of those same people will make fun of communists for saying, well, that wasn't real communism.
Right.
It's the
Yeah,
exact same dynamic. And it's like, okay, but like, if you are to acknowledge one as being fundamentally ridiculous because it clashes with the real world history, why are you doing that with capitalism?
Right.
Oh, because you're told to, ideology.
Yeah, because they're system loyal, which is like a phrase I learned from, I think it was Crime Thing. Where system loyal versus system disloyal. And like, you can be like, I think the trick that a lot of people, especially Americans, do is they think the system that we live under is freedom. So whenever they're talking about freedom and liberty and whatever, they're actually just loyal to the system. And if you resist the system in order to be free, they will crack down on you with a ton of bricks.
Absolutely, especially if you are perhaps aesthetically incompatible with their values, let's say.
Right. I look too Irish, so...
Indeed. So yeah, I mean, it's just like, what's your plan?
I don't have one. I mean,
well, that makes two of us.
Yeah, I'm just getting by. Hopefully, nothing gets worse, even though I know it will.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's only gonna get worse. I'm
Well,
getting way more into 40K recently, so I think I'm finally on board with the everything just kind of sucks and it's grim, dark, and there is no hope.
Yeah. 40K used to be over-the-top satire, and now it's just feeling more predictive, and I don't like that feeling.
No.
Well, enjoy your corpse starch, everybody. Have a great day. Thank you so much for listening to today's podcast episode. This project is done on a DIY basis on extremely antiquated equipment. And if this is something you'd like to hear more of, and maybe you're feeling particularly generous, you can head on over to patreon.com/Auftonomia. That's patreon.com/AFTONOMIA. I'm still looking to figure out what kind of benefits I can offer to any of my subscribers other than my undying gratitude. But if you feel like supporting the show, it would be very helpful. I am a father of 2, husband of 1, trying to provide for my family and do whatever I can to make this world a place I don't have to apologize to those children for. I'd really appreciate any support that happens. Obviously, if you can't, I totally get it. I know how it feels to be up against the wall financially. So thank you so much for listening, and have a great day.